Remember last week you learned diffusion, right? There's more to less. Remember the hemoglobin's holding on to it. So let's review that equation. So do you remember this equation? Remember that? Right? We're loading. So the oxygen is on the hemoglobin. Then you have to go to your tissues. Remember the equation for that. The hemoglobin has to unload the oxygen. So what we're going to cover tonight is how does the hemoglobin know to do that? What tells the hemoglobin to let go or grab? You want to give me an answer?
God.
Does it?
Close.
Electrochemical.
Not so close.
Receptor signal.
No. Femur. Darwin. Turtles. It's always turtles and Darwins. Okay, so we're going to go through that concept of how does the hemoglobin know when it should let go or not of the oxygen. So we're going to play a little animation here to get us going. I did this right.
Oxygen is required for metabolic activity of all body cells, but is only available in the lungs. The partial pressure of oxygen is higher in the alveoli than in the blood. So oxygen diffuses into the blood and can be transported to the other parts of the body.
That's what we learned last week, right? We're going to focus on, well, how does the hemoglobin know it should let go of it here and not just keep it, right? So I'm going to show you this thing here.
The loading and unloading of oxygen to hemoglobin is governed by factors that allow hemoglobin to pick up oxygen in oxygen-rich environments and give up oxygen in regions where it is needed. The more oxygen molecules binding to hemoglobin, the higher its saturation. When all of its oxygen binding sites are filled, hemoglobin is considered to be saturated and is called oxyhemoglobin.
Okay, and that's what we're going to learn for the first hour, is that graph and that picture. So the answer to the question I posed at you, the answer to this, has that big long name over the graph. It's the oxygen dissociation curve, basically. The hemoglobin, oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. I left off hemoglobin. Dissociation. Okay, what does dissociation mean?
Separation.
To separate. What is separating?
Oxygen.
The oxygen from hemoglobin. So that curve, which we're going to memorize tonight, is describing how the hemoglobin does this, how it dissociates. Okay? So we're going to spend a lot of time on that damn curve, which is what students call it every year. So let's go back here. So when there was no oxygen on the hemoglobin, this curve was different looking. So let's go back and see what it looked like when we first started.
The loading and unloading of oxygen to hemoglobin is governed by factors that allow hemoglobin to pick up oxygen in oxygen-rich environments and give up oxygen in regions where it is needed. The more oxygen molecules binding to
Okay, so now if you notice, there's no oxygen on my hemoglobin yet. It's not oxygenated. Look at my graph. I'm going to be graphing these oxygens on this molecule. So to get your bearings, look at the left-hand side, look at the y-axis. What does that say? Percent what? Tip your heads. What does saturation mean? How much is on the hemoglobin? How much loaded we are? How full we are? So in English, 0 means there's no oxygen at all in the blood. 100% means it's all in the blood. How much the blood's carrying. So this hemoglobin has no oxygen on it, so it's unsaturated. Make sense? If I put 4 of them on there, I'll be 100% saturated or full. The problem is this bottom one. What does that bottom x-axis show you?
Partial pressure.
Partial pressure of oxygen from last week, PO2. What is PO2 measuring? What is that trying to measure? Oxygen. Where? Where is this at?
In the blood.
Not the blood.
On the hemoglobin.
Not in the
Tissue.
hemoglobin.
On the tissue.
In the tissues. So, in English, this is the oxygen in my body. This is the oxygen in my blood. And we're going to graph the two together. Okay? So here we go. I'm going to start taking oxygen and putting it on my hemoglobin. So the graph should start to climb from the 0 and climb up the saturation curve. Let's watch that.
the higher its saturation. When all of its oxygen-binding sites are filled, hemoglobin is considered to be saturated and is called oxyhemoglobin.
If you look now, my hemoglobin is fully oxygenated, so my graph is now at 100%. I'm fully loaded, fully saturated. Okay? So we have to figure out where in your body would blood be fully loaded or saturated. So where do you think in your body you'd have the most oxygen?
Capillaries in your lungs.
Capillaries in your lungs. Amen, brother. So this is my lungs, and my lungs make my blood fully red, fully charged, fully loaded, fully saturated. So my lungs are over here, making my blood fully saturated. So if you look at what she says.
Factors that affect the ability of hemoglobin.
So, where's it at? Pick it up from oxygen-rich environments. So where do you have the most oxygen is in your lungs. So you're going to pick up oxygen in your lungs, be fully saturated. Watch what happens now with this.
A key factor influencing the production of oxyhemoglobin is the partial pressure of oxygen. The partial pressure of oxygen determines the number of oxygen molecules that can bind, oxygen loading, or dissociate, oxygen unloading, from hemoglobin. Blood in vessels coming from the lungs is very high in oxygen partial pressure, so saturation is high. This is because oxygen binds to all available sites in hemoglobin and forms oxyhemoglobin.
So my lungs have a lot of oxygen, 104 if you remember last week. That's going to make my blood fully charged, fully loaded, fully saturated. Okay? Keep watching.
Blood near skeletal muscle cells is very low in oxygen partial pressure.
Why would that be true? Why would blood near muscles be low in oxygen?
You're using
Because they're using it, right? So the blood's going to have a number lower than 100. So if you look at this graph, watch what happens as this hemoglobin lets go of the oxygen. Watch what the graph does.
So saturation is low. The higher partial pressure of oxygen bound to oxyhemoglobin causes the oxygen to detach, and it is
So notice what's happening. As this graph goes down, the oxygen's coming off of the hemoglobin. Right?
loaded to the tissues.
That makes sense? Because now that's the concept of this graph. This graph tells me how much will be on the blood and how much will be delivered to your tissues. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put up a static one of that same graph, like this, and we're going to label it so we understand, because you're supposed to understand this graph on your exam in 2 weeks, because I'm going to give it to you. Let's go through and figure this out. We're erasing Tyler's name. Okay, ignore all the blue stuff that I put up there, other classes assignment. Okay, a little smaller here, about like, let's go about like that. That should work. Okay, so let's review what the sides are. The side up here, the y-axis, what is that we're measuring again? Oxygen on the hemoglobin, O2 on the HB, or saturation, or loading, whatever word you prefer there, I don't care. Right? Or associated. What was down here? What was the x-axis?
Tissues.
PO2 of my tissues. That's how much oxygen is in my body parts. Okay, so the way you're supposed to read this is opposite how mathematicians told you to read the graph. You need to start in the upper right and read down to the lower left for this to make sense. So you're going to put your eyeball right up here. Okay. That part up there represents 100% saturation, right? My hemoglobin is 100% loaded or saturated. That makes sense graphically? Where in my body do I fully load my blood?
Capillaries.
So 100 would be my lungs. My lungs have 100 oxygen. They're going to fully load my blood. Make sense? Okay, now we're going to read to the left. Pick a body part for me.
Hand.
Hand, okay. I'm going to put your hand here. This is totally hypothetical. I'm going to say your hand has 40 oxygen because you're using it to take notes. According to this graph, how saturated will my blood be when it goes by your hand at 40?
80.
About 70.
Let's see, well, just follow the lines, right? About 75, or take?
Mm-hmm.
So when the blood gets to my hand, the blood will be able to carry or load 75%. Okay? See the math? Here's the harder question. How much got unloaded to the hand? Which is not on the graph.
25.
Say it loud.
About 25.
How'd you get that number?
Good math.
You're good. Good. Can you tell me which math you did?
100% to minus 75.
Bingo. You take the 100% and you subtract how much the blood can carry now. It could carry 100% of my lungs. It can only carry 75% of my hand. Therefore, it has to give away 25% would have to be unloaded or dissociated to my body part. So the hemoglobin is going to give up 25% of its oxygen to feed my hand and keep the other 75% in the blood. Make sense? So you have to figure out what the blood has in it, figure out how much the blood will retain, and then subtract the two. You always start the lung at 100 and subtract the next value. Let's do another one. Give me another body part. Toe, okay. Let's put toe here. You're really using your toe tonight. I'm going to say your toe has only 20 oxygens in it. I'm making this up, right? Okay, tell me how much oxygen's in the blood when it goes by my toe at 20.
25.
I'm going to vote for 25, over 30 since I can auction. Let's go. Let's say 20, okay? Just for today. So when the blood goes by my toe, the blood can hold only 20%. So how much would your blood give your toe if it came from the lung to the toe directly?
80.
I'm going to vote for 80. I got a nod.
80.
I got deer. Good. You're going to deliver 80% of your oxygen to your toe because you can only hold 20% when you get there. So you have to give away the remainder. So the hemoglobin is going to give away the amount this graph tells it to. And then diffusion will take it out of the blood and put it into your tissues. Let's do one more. I'm going to do let's pick something. Give me another body part.
Brain.
Okay, brains. You don't use those. Brains, over here. Brains at 80. Do the math for me. How much blood would go to your brain? Not all at once now. Let's find out. So you go up. Go over, what's that, about 95? So how much blood would go to your brain if your brain had 80? 5% of your blood's oxygen would go to your brain because your brain has 80 PO2. Yes?
That's 5%. I'm trying to get, basically the question is, what's the relevance between how much total oxygen your brain gets versus your toe?
This is what determines. So the blood that goes to the brain,
Yeah.
the circuitry you learned last term, it would give away 5% of its oxygen. The blood that ends up going to your toe would give away 80% of its oxygen.
Of a baseline total capacity.
Yes, of whatever capacity those RBCs have in the volume at that
So your
time.
toe is getting a lot more oxygen
It is.
than your brain
Yes, in this situation.
in this situation.
So-
Is there like a real, like, order and distance of where things are? I don't understand.
It's based totally on demand. This is supply and demand. The organs that have the least amount of oxygen get fed the most by your blood. The ones that need the least amount of oxygen get fed the least by your blood. So it's supply and demand. If you're taking notes, your hand is busy, it's going to get more oxygen than your brain that's not doing anything. This is how the blood knows how much gases to give to whom. Right? It's all diffusion, but the blood has to decide how much to give each body part on its route through. So let's pretend you have an organ, let's say your lungs, like right here. How much would your lungs receive from your blood?
100.
0, right? They're fully oxygenated. They don't need any oxygen. So this enables the blood to pick up oxygen in your lungs and deliver it to the part that needs it the most and give the most away and keep the rest in the blood. All right, see the math here? So this tells the hemoglobin which of these two it should be doing, keeping it or dumping it, based upon that graph. All right, so we're going to do some more practice problems of that after watching the animation. Maybe, maybe not. Let's do the hemoglobin dissociation curve some more. Back to my animation, which is here. All right, so as I load the hemoglobin, the graph is up high. As the graph goes down, I have to unload or dissociate. All right. So let's do that.
Oxyhemoglobin saturation is affected by blood pH values. Increased metabolic acids, like lactic acid and carbonic acid, enhance dissociation of oxyhemoglobin and the unloading of oxygen.
Boom, let's stop there and look at that curve. Okay, you're normally here, you're more sig there. So what's going to happen to the amount of unloading if the graph goes like that? More or less? She just told you.
More.
More. So look at it visually, right? The further down I go from the top, the more unloading I get, right? So you start here at 100. This graph is always further down, so it means I'm going to unload more to any body part. So if I was here under normal pH, I'm lower on the curve, therefore I'm going to deliver more oxygen than normal.
Does that mean your blood saturation in your tissue is lower at a higher?
Yes, it's delivering more to your tissue, so retaining less in the blood. If you change this.
Also, you have less in the tissue.
Yes.
It's disassociated more, but you have less.
Right. So for any given tissue, it delivers more if you acidify the tissue.
Because the 100% is always 100%.
You assume it's always
And you
100%.
never go above 100%.
Not last time I checked.
So that always.
Right, so you always start at 100. These tissues will be getting more because of the acidity than they would have before. Yes?
So I think I'm a little confused. So does it still have to do with diffusion where you're
Yes.
going from low to high?
Correct.
And if whatever part of your body needs it the most, that's where it goes to?
Right. So this is saying where the hemoglobin will release the oxygen. The fusion tells it to go into your body, but this tells it how much to give each body part. All right, so we're going to make that graph one more time. So it's in your notes forever and ever and ever. So let's review. What went up the y-axis? Percent saturation, right? From nothing to something. 0 to 100%. What went across the bottom?
PO2.
PO2, body tissues, nothing to a bunch. And so you're going to just memorize the graph. Looks like a sinusoidal curve. Goes like this kind of thing. Okay, so now we're going to figure out what we're doing. So this is a normal curve. Now on this animation, if I acidify the curve, this curve here is acid. If I increase the acid, the curve went which way? Up or down?
Down.
Down. So we call this a downshift. The curve slides downwards. Or you can call it a right shift if you want. And when I do that, I'm going to unload more or less? More. Because there's a greater difference between the 100% and the new value. So if I shift my curve to the right or down, that's going to tell my hemoglobin to unload more. So acid makes me unload more to my tissues. Yes?
If you say you increase the acid in your tissues, can you also state, the result is you decrease the oxygen saturation in your tissue?
Oxygen saturation of the blood.
Of the oxygen saturation in the tissue.
No,
This is-
tissues would have more, but the blood would have less.
Well, if you're starting at 100, how do you have more?
So what would happen is I'd always start at 100.
Yeah.
The acidic tissues would end up getting more delivered to them than before, leaving less in the blood than before, than normal.
So as you increase the acid, does your
The tissues get more, the blood holds less. So the blood gives up more than before.
Are there a lot of organs other than the muscles that produce acid, or is this a way to target oxygen to muscles?
The muscles do the most when you exercise, but any organ that makes acid would cause the same effect. So the muscles, obviously, with lactic acid would make the most. But any organ that's somewhat hypoxic would do the same thing. So let me show you the rest of the animation.
This effect is called the Bohr effect.
Not bored.
Lowered pH increases the unloading of oxygen from oxyhemoglobin, thereby making oxygen available for actively metabolizing cells.
So if you were a hemoglobin molecule, pretend they have a brain, they see the acid, they assume you must need more oxygen, so they deliver more than normal. So the saturation goes down, but the unloading goes up. You give more away. So let's do this.
In contrast, elevated pH values increase the affinity of oxygen to hemoglobin, thereby lowering the unloading of oxygen to tissue cells.
So the green line, this is going to be less acid. The green line's the less acid. So which way did the curve go with the less acid? It went up, call it an upshift. Or a left shift, you can say it either way. So I made my curve go up. So how much would I unload if the curve is now higher than before? I'm going to unload less. So my tissues would get less out of my blood if I go up. The acid would make the curve go down, so the tissues get more than before out of my blood compared to normal. So different things will shift the curve, and the blood would deliver more or less to any given body part at the same PO2. So more acid, more unloading, less acid, less unloading. So far so good? Look at me like I have 3 heads. Okay, let me show you a static picture of this, just so you can grapple with this a little bit. Here's the exact same graph, just with different colors. So was that purple? I don't know what color that is. That's normal. Now this one shows that I have dropped my pH, which means I'm more acidic. Therefore the graph shifts down, therefore I'm delivering more oxygen to any given body part than before. This one here is less acidic, more basic, it goes up, therefore there's less distance from the top, therefore I deliver less. Make sense? So tell me why there's a CO2 here. What does CO2 have to do with this? Back to last week.
The opposite of,
What does CO2 make in your blood? Acid. So I can also substitute not only acid, but I can also substitute CO2. So CO2 is the same thing as acid, right, from last week. So not only can acid do that, but CO2, which is acidic, can do it. And over here, I can have low CO2, which is the same as acid. So CO2 and acidity are the same thing to your body, like we learned last week. So more acid, more CO2, unload more. Less acid, less CO2, unload less. Shift up, shift up, shift down. Make sense? Okay, now we'll do the hard one. I'm going to give you another graph. You're going to interpret it for me. Boom. Okay, find the normal body temperature. Okay, I'm going to give you a fever, 43 degrees. Tell me what's going to happen to your unloading.
Increase.
I have a vote for increase. Got a yes, got a nod, got a hand. That looks exactly like this graph, right? So if you heat the person up, the hemoglobin graph shifts down. There's a greater distance from the top. Therefore, we can add another one. Increased temperature also causes me to unload more. So look at the blue lines. What the heck are those for? Is that cold? So if I lower your temperature, that's going to cause me to unload less. Makes sense? So temperature affects the curve, acid affects the curve, and CO2 affects the curve. They'll tell the hemoglobin what to do.
Is this because when your body is overheating, it's harder to keep it moving and
More or less.
working?
The body assumes you have a fever, so it needs lots of energy and oxygen to keep it going. The body here assumes that you're frozen and you're going to die anyway, basically. So the hemoglobin is interpreting this as a metabolism. Yes?
So with that graph, it seems to like even out a little bit more towards 100%
Yeah.
of oxygen at the tissue. Does that mean that if there's like a body part that requires or that has less oxygen, it's going to be more affected
Yes.
by that?
Right. So you can always assume that the lungs are always at 100 no matter what. And then the differences in this middle zone is where the biggest differences lie. Right. So they should all meet eventually at 100. So let me show you that I'm not making this up much. Let's go back to this one. So this was the pH one.
Carbon dioxide can also bind to hemoglobin.
Remember that?
The effect of carbon dioxide partial pressure is similar to the effect of pH. During aerobic metabolism, carbon dioxide gas is generated. The carbon dioxide gas is temporarily converted to carbonic acid in red blood cells. The result of increased carbon dioxide gas in the blood is a lowered pH, causing the Bohr effect. Elevated carbon dioxide levels enhance unbinding of oxygen from oxyhemoglobin, thereby making oxygen available for actively metabolizing cells. By contrast, Decreased carbon dioxide, as in the alveolar spaces, increases affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen and promotes oxygen loading and transport.
That's why you load at the lung and unload the tissues, is because that bore shift tells it to hold on to it better at the lung and unhold it. Is that even a word? Unhold it at the body tissue. Let's do another one.
To a limited degree, changes in temperature affect the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. The oxygen-carrying ability of hemoglobin is unaffected by normal temperatures. However, near metabolically active cells, blood temperature rises and decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. The increased temperature promotes unloading of oxygen to continue fueling aerobic metabolism. When temperatures lower, metabolism slows, and the need for oxygen in cells lessens. More oxygen remains bound to the hemoglobin.
Makes sense? So you got to think of the blood and the tissues being opposites. The more that's in the blood, the less you give to the tissues. The more you give the tissues, the less that's in the blood. This graph tells the blood which one to do. So if I freeze you, your cells need less oxygen, so the hemoglobin holds on to it more. If you're getting hot, the hemoglobin lets go of the oxygen more to feed you, reducing the blood saturation but increasing your tissue oxygenation. Make sense? So you have to understand these shifts if you go up or down and how to interpret them. Is that good? Yes?
So is it, back to the beginning, did you say that it is basically due to concentration gradients? Or?
That tells the oxygen which direction to go. This tells the hemoglobin how much oxygen it should allow to go.
So the hemoglobin is obeying essentially CO2 levels
Yes.
throughout the body?
Yes.
But is that like chemically or?
That's from this. So as the CO2 changes basically the hemoglobin molecule, so it has a greater or lesser affinity. And that tells the hemoglobin I should let go easier or
like
not.
its shape? Or?
Yes. Basically it's an allosteric effect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you confuse the system based on the other factors and not how much oxygen you have?
Yes.
So if you're smoking while working out naked in freezing temperature,
Wow! Yeah! All right. I got it.
you can crash the system, is that?
The hemoglobin have a difficult time figuring out what it should be doing. Now I'm sure there's some hierarchy that the hemoglobin will obey one over the other. The pH is the most profound. Yeah, the hemoglobin doesn't know why it's getting told this. It just realizes if I'm hot, give more. If I'm not hot, give less. So depending on the body part, the hemoglobin would try to somehow negotiate this whole thing. Right. So if you have an acidic body part and you chill it, in theory the hemoglobin would go back to normal because each one would cancel. Make sense? Speaking of screwing up the system, let's do that. Not the naked thing. That's cool though. Get out your packet of pain. We have a little activity that's going to utilize this information. Page 8. We're going to do this as a class. Find this one on Mount Denali. Or someone told me earlier I had the wrong number there. But that's okay. Find page 8. We'll do the class. Okay, this guy climbs a big tall hill, Mount Hood, Mount Denali. What's wrong with being way up there? For number one. Low oxygen. Okay, so when you go up way up high, there's no oxygen. Okay, so tell me what's going to happen for number 2, the ability of the body to extract oxygen from the air if there's less oxygen outside the body. Be limited, because remember diffusion says you go from high to low. If the outside is becoming even lower, it makes it less gradient, right? So it's harder due to less diffusion. It's harder to get the oxygen in because there's less out there anyway. Does that make sense? You have less, more? Is that English? Right. So what does your brain do when it seems to be harder to get gases to move?
Breathe faster.
You breathe faster. You hyperventilate. Now we got to figure out something. Last week, what did I tell you determines breathing rate? CO2, but this has nothing to do with CO2. So, welcome to the world of exceptions. This is called hypoxic drive. This is an exception, not the rule. So I'm going to tell you about hypoxic drive and what it has to do with this situation. So this is medical terminology. What does hypoxic mean? Hypoxic means low oxygen. So hypoxic drive. Very low oxygen. How low does it have to go to be this low, says the limbo?
60%.
Actually, that's pretty close. Less than 25. Yeah, they're good. 12, 105. So you have to be less than, so this is not holding your breath. This is not waking up in the morning. This is going to Mount Hood, right? This is a very abnormal level, yes.
And is this low O2 levels in a particular body part? Or
Yes,
in your...
like in the blood.
Okay, in the blood.
So, on a test question, if I ask you what determines breathing rate, you're going to say what you learned last week, which is acid. But if you climb to the top of a mountain, you have this other system that will regulate your breathing rate called the hypoxic. It's only when it's very, very low oxygen does this system kick in. To prove I'm not making this up much, I'm going to show you a picture I didn't show you last week. Well, I showed you, I just took some of it off. Remember how we had the little ponds thing? Right? All right. So if you remember, I showed you the chemoreceptors. I said, there they are. Those are the things that determine your breathing rate, right? I stood here and screamed at you. I lied, because if you look at the one above it, there's that oxygen part. So normally your body's going to regulate breathing by acid. However, if I put you on top of Mount Hood, the body will notice eventually that you're running out of air and you're going to die. So the brain says, I better check oxygen too, otherwise you'll be dead. So this is an abnormality. So on the test question, unless I say high altitude, you're not doing this. This is only for low oxygen, long-term environments. So if you know someone in the hospital is on COPD, they're in hypoxic mode because they've been low on oxygen so long, the brain has to keep them alive somehow by doing this. Right? But this is the abnormal situation. So hypoxic drive would kick in if you went up Mount Hood or Mount Denali or Everest. Your brain would notice that you're not getting enough air. Make sense? So why don't you do this when you're underwater? What's that underwater blackout thing? Why didn't you just do this anyway?
Too fast.
It's too fast, right? You black out in 2 minutes. This is long-term, over days, weeks, months kind of thing. So how long was it on Mount Denali? Did it say? How long would it take you to climb to the top of the mountain? Let's see. Right, so he's been climbing, have been climbing. So he's been doing this a while, and then a couple hours after he gets up there, he has problems. This is not just holding your breath, this is going for a high hike, and after a while you start noticing this. So he's going to hyperventilate to get more oxygen in his body, which then does number 3. If I hyperventilate, what should my blood gases do? Tell me. Which one's going up? There are 2. Oxygen should go up, or at least not go down. Now give me the other one. CO2 should do what? Down, because I'm exhaling more. So if I begin to breathe faster, oxygen should go up, exhaling the acid should go down, right? Everyone buy that? Question 4, on an exam, if you ever see hemoglobin loading, unloading, that means that damn curve. So you're going to look at the curve you took notes on, and try to figure out how that's going to affect the loading and unloading of hemoglobin based upon what I just wrote, number 3. So what do you think is going to happen if you do number 3 to your loading and unloading? Let's find out. I'll help you out.
You might unload less.
I vote for unload less.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I'll vote for unload more.
CO's going down.
Let's find out.
More acid.
Here's a curve. Let's see, carbon dioxide. So Mark's carbon dioxide levels went where?
Down.
Ooh, down. That's this one, right?
Yeah.
So therefore the curve went up, which means he unloads less. So he's going to unload less to his tissues than before.
And that's the same thing as saying you're loading more.
Yes.
Okay.
If there's an increase in saturation or maintaining saturation, less unloading. So think of the irony in this. He has more oxygen in his blood, but it's not going to his tissues. The blood is hanging on to it and not letting it go. Right? So it's going to stay in the blood and be unloaded less. Make sense? Or lack of dissociation. Yes?
Why?
Because the blood doesn't realize you climbed the Denali. The blood assumes that you're not exercising because the acid went down. So the hemoglobin would say the only reason acid goes down is you're not doing anything. Therefore, I'm going to hold on the oxygen. It doesn't realize you climbed a big mountain. The hemoglobin doesn't realize that. So it just does what it tells it, which is that means you don't need any oxygen. Right.
So, wait, sorry, at high elevation pressure is
Yes.
less?
Pressure's less. So oxygen can't diffuse in because of Dalton's law. There's a lower pressure. That makes sense on the less unloading? So you have more in the blood, but less is getting to the tissues that need it. So what happens to you when you go up in a hill? What do you feel like after a while? Like in Denver?
Lightheaded.
Right, because you don't have any oxygen getting to your tissues because it's staying in the bloodstream and not getting unloaded. So look at number 5. If you survive a couple days, your body has a plan. You're going to make this weird chemical called 2,3-DPG, or BPG. And I'm going to show you what that chemical does for you. Let's go to an animation, shall we?
Red blood cells do not have mitochondria,
Gee whiz
so they
that.
do not undergo aerobic metabolism, using only glycolysis to generate ATP. Bisphosphoglycerate, or BPG, a special product of glycolysis, accumulates in red blood cells in low oxygen situations. The hormones thyroxine, human growth hormone, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and testosterone can increase the production of BPG. The higher the level of BPG in the blood, the more oxygen that is unloaded from the hemoglobin.
That's the part you have to know. The more BPG, the more I'm going to unload to my tissues. So look at question 5 again. What did 5 ask? He's going to make BPG. How's it going to affect his pulmonary system? He's going to what?
Unload more.
He's going to unload more. You can't read right on there. So he went from unloading less to now his body's able to unload more to his tissues. Get it out of the blood and put it into your body. So, let me show you a graph of that. So can you predict what the graph of BPG would look like if I graph the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve with BPG on it?
It would start higher and then go lower.
Go for that. And what else one? Up, down,
Downshift.
downshift. How about that one?
That's what I meant.
So here's normal BPG. Here's Mark on Mount Denali. His curve went which way? Down, which is going to make him unload more to his tissues so he can keep his brain alive on Mount Denali. So that would also cause a shift to the right or down. Yes.
So DPG is, it happens because you have hypoxic
Yes.
drive? Okay.
Yes.
So basically, hypoxic drive doesn't help you until a couple of days?
Correct.
Okay, before that, you're just retaining blood in your oxygen.
Right.
It's not going, okay.
So in the hyperventilation actually hurts you for a few days because you unload less. And then once your body gets to this, then it's going to help you because then you're going to start unloading it. But initially, you actually have less oxygen to your body parts because you shifted the other way. And DPG shifts you back. Okay. Make sense? You okay with the curve? So if you understand that the right shift makes me unload more, that's the point of this exercise. Yes?
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
So is that why when they're coming down from the mountains, depending on how you are, how high up you went, you have to come down slowly?
Partly that, partly the blood gases, yeah. This is also why if you just drop someone on top of Mount Hood for a while, they're not going to have a very good day. It takes a couple days to make this work. That's why they have base camps, right? You go up and stay there. You go up and stay there because that's what you're trying to do after 3 days. Right? So the idea is the slower the ascent, the more BPG you can produce to compensate for that.
So when you have altitude sickness,
That's basically this one here, the purple one. The oxygen's staying in the blood and not getting anywhere else, like to
That's
your
why
brain.
people just start falling asleep.
Yeah, your brain runs out of oxygen, so the instinct is to faint. When you faint at high altitude, it's called dead. Yes, question?
Yeah, I understand. So the people that live at high altitudes
Yes.
all the time, do they have this in their blood, or are they just
Yes.
higher levels all the time?
So if you go to Peru, not that you do that, people have a larger chest capacity, number one. Their hemoglobin actually has a greater affinity for oxygen than people at normal altitudes. It actually has a fetal system in it. And then they have a whole lot of DPG. Because the only way you can survive at altitude is to be able to keep more oxygen in your blood, have more of that being delivered, unloaded when you need it. So they have a multiple system.
So why aren't Peruvians winning all the Tour de France?
Who knows? That could be that whole steroid thing, I don't know.
But they, I mean,
They should have more oxygen.
they should have increased capacity.
They should. Now whether or not it gets to the muscles, right, you got to get the blood system and all that.
What does DPG stand for?
Diphosphoglycerate. Am I right? So there's a D is the di and B is a bi. So they're both the same. All you got to know is DPG or VPG. That's cool with me. Let's keep going. Now that you've understood that, let's do the lab data. He came down. He's alive. Thank goodness. Now we're going to interpret future healthcare professionals these charts. So here's Mark. Here's everybody else. We're going to make a conclusion. So Mark has 52 oxygen in his arteries. Normal is about there. So what do you conclude from that? Low oxygen in his blood. He has low blood oxygen. So oxygen, we'll just write that on there. So, conclusion, bad. He has half the number, right? You have half the oxygen in your bloodstream. That wouldn't be good if you're trying to stay alive. Okay, look at arterial CO2. He has 30, normal's about 40, so that is low. But remember, he's been breathing it away, so that's expected. Alveolar oxygen, where is that? In the lungs. Tell me about the lungs. High. And this one's tidal volume, which you're going to do next time in lab. That's actually normal. All right. So, number 6. Which one's this problem for Mark? The arterial oxygen. He has oxygen in his air sacs, but it's not getting into his blood very well. And that's going to be a problem. Right? So his lungs are fine, but his blood isn't getting the oxygen inside. That's a problem. Make sense? Yeah.
So if the problem is the pressure difference not
Yeah.
being enough, then why, if it's getting into the alveoli, how come it's just not crossing the membrane?
Tell me about last week what we learned about air sacs. So give me 3 magic things air sacs have to have.
Surfactant.
Surfactant,
Macrophage.
macrophages, and thin. Okay, so worthless trivia. If the pressure goes down outside your lungs, at some point your blood pressure is higher than the air in your air sacs. So what will blood want to do if the blood is more pressured than the air? The blood will leave my capillaries and go into the air sacs. That's called pulmonary edema. So your air sacs fill with blood, therefore they can't get the oxygen from here to go into there. There's blood in the way. That's pulmonary edema. Right? You lose so much pressure, the blood begins to go into your lungs instead of out around it. That's what's happening here. He's losing alveolar tension. So that's causing that.
Because that's a low pressure
Yes.
area that your blood can flow to?
Yes.
So instead of the high pressure being outside, it's now your blood that has the
Blood
high
has the
pressure.
most pressure of anything.
So it trumps
Right.
outside.
So if you go away by a mountain, the blood will go wherever it's easiest, which is into your air sacs, and not through all the arteries that are constricting it. So you get pulmonary edema because the blood would rather go here than stay in there. Because there's no pressure against it from the blood, the air sacs. Make sense? You don't have to know that magical thing. What you have to understand is that will kill you. Make sense? So this whole interpretation was about those charts. You understand the graphs. That was the point of this exercise. If it shifts up or shifts down, more or less. So if you understand questions 4 and 5, that's the point of this exercise. And that is not on your quiz next week. So this graph will be on your exam in 2 weeks, but not on your quiz next week. Because what's on your quiz next week is the next page, actually next couple pages. Find page 11 in your packet of paint. We did the other one. Find this page. Draw a line in your notes. We're on a totally different subject now. We are on digestion.